Partners, who at the time was the largest private purchaser of healthcare in the world. That was before their bankruptcy. It probably contributed to their bankruptcy. What I'm doing now is I spend a lot of time, I met Frances actually through work that I've done in health tech. So spend a lot of time with people who are, I'm not developing apps, I'm not a person who's making the solutions, rather I'm a person who is tracking the solutions and helping entrepreneurs to tell their stories. So we make a lot of video interviews. This may be helpful for some of your projects, where we interview entrepreneurs who tell the story about how they got their idea, how they think their solution's going to work. I always ask them how you think you're going to make money, because it's nice to say you're going to go out and sell this great thing to health plans, but that's not actually how the world works. Health plan mostly isn't that interested in purchasing things that are being developed as one-offs. It's just too complicated, particularly for large organizations. So that's my background. What I wanted to know is kind of where you all are heading. How many people in here are thinking about becoming a physician? Okay, some. Nursing? Anyone in nursing? Anyone else in any other part of the delivery system, like hospital administrator or medical center administrator? Okay. What about people on the tech side? What about bioengineering or anything along that line, where you would actually be creating more technical solutions? Okay, so a huge mixture, but you all want to do something in health, right? Okay, and that's a good decision, because health is a seventh of the economy. It was really the only sector that didn't crash and burn badly during the recession. And as you'll see when I go through this slideshow, there's just so many aspects to healthcare. And you can have an interesting career, as I did, where you start out doing one thing, and you don't have to stay with it forever. You can do one thing, and then you can morph into another thing. You can get some more training, morph into another thing. There's so many opportunities and so much need. So the other thing I want to say is, if you guys have questions, just raise your hand or shout it out during the presentation. I actually started out a little more negative than this. I think my initial pass at this slide said that, you know, there's so many broken things that need to be fixed. So if you've talked to people who are out there working in frontline healthcare, you know that there's a lot of unhappiness, and that there's a lot of things in transition that are making it difficult for everybody, regardless of whether they're a physician or if they're in nursing or if they're in some other aspect of healthcare. So lots of moving parts are going on. But I thought I'd concentrate on these few areas, and then I'm going to give you some specific examples. And by the way, all these slides will be available to you, and all the references, because I could do it, all the references come from my blog that Dr. Weighs in. They're all written by me, but I have hyperlinks embedded in it. And I would love to have all of you sign up for our newsletter. We're going to pass around, there's a sign-up sheet, just put your email on it, and we'll sign you up, and you'll get a weekly newsletter that tells you about these innovations. So the first thing I want to talk about is medical education and training. So medical education has trouble reforming itself. There are so many people who have a stake in keeping things the way it is, because that means jobs for them. But one of the things that we know, and people can shout out whether they agree with it, is that we're still pretty much picking people to get into medical school the way we picked people to get into medical school when I went. We're picking people who are really good at taking tests. We're picking people who are super competitive. We're not spending a whole lot of time. Everybody writes their essay, right? Oh, yeah, I want to do this when I grow up. Blah, blah, blah. But we're not really spending a lot of time looking at people's social skills and backgrounds. So that's one area that I want to talk about. The other area I want to talk about is care delivery, because there's so many innovations that are taking place in care delivery now. So when I trained, Frances, I think when you trained too, the model was you were going to get out of medical school, you know, do a year or two of going to go out, you're going to hang up a shingle, and you're going to run a little business, fee-for-service, private practice. That's what you're going to do. Now, in California, it's different because we have Kaiser that takes care of about 30% of the population, both in northern and southern California. But the middle of the country, there's still a lot of people doing fee-for-service, private practice, with their shingle hanging out. But lots of new options now. We're going to talk about those. We're going to talk a little bit about payment and coverage, but this is a really complicated area. But just to let you know, this whole idea of fee-for-service is not working anymore. Fee-for-service means that you come to me and I sell you a series of things. So I will sell you an EKG, I will sell you my evaluation, I will, it's all, we're buying healthcare by the piece. And what we really need to do, and what we're trying to figure out how to do, is to sell what you really want when you go to a hospital or healthcare, or a clinic, or whatever aspect of healthcare you go to. You don't really want to just get a pill or an EKG or some advice. What you want to do is get better, right? You want to have good outcomes, and we're trying to figure out how to pay for outcomes. And then insurance coverage. That's another. Each one of these we could do a whole hour. Then I want to talk a little bit about patient engagement and physician communication, because this is a really important area. And then my favorite is demedicalizing healthcare. We've turned everything into a medical problem. These are things that I used to call grandma medicine. When I was young and I got sick, my grandmother would do a mustard plaster or some other kind of crazy thing. And you know what? I got better, because most of the time we get better. But now you feel like you have to go to a hospital or a doctor to tell you you're going to get better no matter what you do. And then we'll talk a little bit about disruptive healthcare technologies for both diagnosis and treatment. So that's kind of an overview. Okay, and again, I'm not going to be able to go through each one of these. So the one I wanted to really focus on here is democratizing medical education, the selection process. Because, as I said, the way it happens in this country is you have to jump through all these hoops, right? You get really good grades as an undergraduate. You take MCATs. You got to nail your MCATs. Everybody takes special courses, right? All of you who are thinking about applying to medical school know that you have to jump through all those hoops. That isn't the way it takes place in a lot of countries. In a lot of countries, you get a chance to get in, but then you have to prove yourself to stay in. And there's a really interesting model in Cuba, because one of the problems we've had in this country is maldistribution of our physicians. So when physicians get through their training, they're unfortunately now usually with huge amounts of debt, which encourages them to go into high-paying specialties, which are usually the surgical subspecialties, or like my son's a radiologist. He told me it was a lifestyle issue, Mom, and so I'm going to do that. And they're less likely to go into primary care, which we really need, and they're certainly less likely to end up in more rural parts of the country, which really is, there's a great need to have well-trained physicians. So there's a medical school in Cuba that actually isn't training Cubans. It's actually training people from all over the world. And they are chosen for their desire to help their own community. And they come from communities where they speak the language of, they will speak the language of their community because they're from the community. They're committed to going back because that's where their family members are. And this medical school subsidizes them. They actually get a little stipend, so they not only go without having huge out-of-pocket costs, but they get a little stipend. And then at the end of the day, they end up back in those rural areas. So it's a really interesting model, I think, for how to solve a problem that we haven't been very good at solving. And we offer people opportunities to go into, National Health Service, have other kinds of payback. But at the end of the day, if you're not from the rural area, if you're not committed to being there and staying there over the long run, that isn't going to be where you'll end up. So I have a hyperlink that will describe that. It's actually a story that I wrote with another physician about advances in medical education, and that was one that I thought was very interesting. Another one that's really interesting is, are you all aware of MOOCs for medical school? There's a Canadian physician who now lives, I think, in Washington, and she's designed a curriculum that that can basically teach medicine via online courses. There is you're not. It's not like, I know all the medical schools are doing online things now, and you don't have to show up and give a lecture. This whole thing is virtual, and I have a link also to that. This medical school has accredited their courses, and they've been shown to be as good as if you got them delivered in another way. And they're being used, for example, in a partnership in the Sudan to train family docs, right? In a really remote area. So those are two really interesting things. I'm not going to talk about any of these other ones unless you all have a specific interest or question about it.
I did have a question about something you said earlier. The university in Cuba, I'm wondering if they have students who are international and they end up with a stipend, where does all of the money come from?
You know, it's a good question. I don't know the answer to it. You may be able to find it in the link that I provided, but I don't actually recall the answer to the question.
Didn't your name this go?
You know, I knew you were going to ask that. You can tell how I was avoiding it. Escuela Latinoamerica de Medicina, ELAM. It's Havana-based, and actually it's one of the largest medical schools in the world. There are close to 20,000 medical students from 110 countries.
Wait, how big is the class?
I don't know.
20,000?
Yeah, I don't know. But I have a link in the article that I wrote about ELAM. There's a link where you can go online and read more about the details of that. Any other questions?
Yes, all the other points up there kind of make intuitive sense with regards to medical competence. What do you see as the issue with measuring medical competence at this as it stands?
Well, the reason I put this on here is I go to a lot of conferences where startups are presenting their apps or platforms or whatever, and I met a he was actually a psych resident who started a company called Med Matrix or something like that. I'll have to look up the name of that one too. And what he did was he basically digitized the whole paper process of evaluating residents. So usually the people who are evaluating you, they have to, be keeping track of the stuff that you're doing, and you, the medical student, have to keep track of the stuff you're doing, particularly in the area of procedures. Oh, I did 10 of these, or 6 of these, or 5 of these, and he's digitized the whole thing to make it easier both for the medical students and for the teachers at the medical school. And I have a link in there to see if I can find it really quickly. If you want to stay after, I can pull it up for you, or you can just do the link. So care delivery. We all know about team care. When I was in training, it really was one-on-one care. But now we know, particularly for complex conditions, chronic conditions like diabetes, that you really need a team of people to take care of you. Think about diabetes, you need not just a physician, you may need several different kinds of physicians. You need people who can do patient education. You need people who can help you with your foot care. You just need a whole variety of people. So team care has really, particularly in institutionalized delivery systems like Kaiser, it's really the norm now. But there are a couple things that I think are really interesting. Telemedicine is now having a heyday. And this may be one of the ways that we're successful at addressing the problems of maldistribution in the rural areas is via telemedicine solutions. And it's both telemedicine solutions that are local, say just US based, but there's an entrepreneur that I interviewed recently with a company called Curely, which is an international telemedicine. So he has doctors from all over the world that you can access to get your care. And another variation on that was one that is called Consejo Sano, where the entrepreneur contracted with physicians in Mexico to deliver telephonic care to people who are primarily Spanish-speaking and low-income here in the U.S. Really interesting model, I think. Now, they're not doing hands-on care, but they're, delivering advice. And that's actually how they handled some of the legal realities of being able to do cross-border care. Any thoughts about care delivery? Any questions about care delivery?
I'm sure you can talk about this for a while, but I haven't heard much about how virtual reality plays a role in medicine. Do you mind sharing some examples?
Sure. Well, let me talk about a company that is using avatars as opposed to VR. And it's called Cognito, and they actually have developed an avatar-based program to help people have difficult conversations. So conversations around, let's say, sexual counseling, or conversations around getting your child to lose weight. So that's pretty interesting. And then some of the virtual reality, would you consider Google Glass to be a virtual reality? They can more or
Augmented.
less. Because I can tell you about another really interesting company called Brain Power, which is using Google Glass to help autistic kids learn how to communicate better. And this is a Bay Area company. It's a startup. It's I know one of the people who's involved in the company. And the interesting thing is, so with kids with autism, they have trouble with looking in the eyes. And so when they have the Google glasses on, it makes you feel like they're looking in your eyes, even though they're not. So cost, payment, and coverage. Do you guys all have health insurance? Somebody laughed. Do you get it through UC? No?
Yeah, so as far as I understand, you can opt in, or you have to show proof of insurance through your parents or some other means in order to opt out of university health insurance. Otherwise, they automatically tack on, I don't know, what is it, like $1,400 per semester for your health insurance.
$1,400 per semester.
Right.
Okay.
I think from most kids in university who get health insurance through their parents who are working up to 25, they kind of tack on through a business associated health insurance. If not, yeah, you have the option to sign up for the school's health insurance. For me, I'm out of school, getting ready for med school, but I'm kind of in this gap area where I can't make a certain amount of money if I want to qualify for Medi-Cal. So I'm a teacher, but I have to choose how many classes I pick, otherwise I lose my health insurance. I'm going to pick a plan with ridiculous premiums. I'm a healthy 25-year-old guy, and I don't want to be paying all this money. It's, like you said, we can go into health insurance for another hour, but.
Yeah, so we have a huge problem in this country with the way our health insurance is structured. And I think you're capturing some of it here. First of all, this ability to stay on your parents' plan until you're 26, you can thank Obamacare for that. So all the people that would like to repeal it, that actually was one of many provisions that have already brought great benefit to people. But even though we have Obamacare now, and in California we have Covered California, so we have an exchange, I consult for CMS and the federal exchanges, and even though you're covered, and you guys can tell me this, you're all young and healthy, so you're probably not using your health insurance very much, but the amount of out-of-pocket now is really unbelievable. I'm seeing, do you know the difference between copay and coinsurance? Copay would be I pay $25 if I go see the doctor. Coinsurance means I pay 25% of the cost. I'm now seeing coinsurance for inpatient stay, that's really what the driver of all the costs, of 40%. So it's not really even insurance. And part of the problem is that the health plans are doing that because healthcare itself, the delivery of healthcare itself, the unit cost of healthcare is so high that they're trying to stay in business. Some of them are trying to do more than stay in business, but the economics are such that they end up passing the costs onto all of you. So a few things that I think need to happen, and I know you didn't want to dwell too much on policy, but I think this is one of the major areas that differentiates us from all the other developed countries, is our absolute refusal to get to universal care in a way that makes sense for people. We have to control costs. Drug costs have to be negotiated, and out-of-pocket cost share has to be regulated. Some of the benefit designs I'm seeing, there's something called maximum out-of-pocket, which means you pay your co-pays or your co-insurance or whatever, you keep on paying, but they put a ceiling on it. But if the ceiling's $6,000 or $7,000 or $8,000, and you're a low-income person, that didn't actually really help you all that much. We have to kill fee-for-service. We've got to get away from selling healthcare by the piece and getting into selling healthcare for outcomes. And we have to get to universal coverage. I personally think we need to get rid of our dependence on employer-based care, and we need to get to some form of national health insurance. We may actually end up getting there, because how's the saying that goes that Americans will do everything the wrong way until finally they get to the right way, or something like that. And we've been struggling with this for my entire career. And then another issue that I just wanted to raise, and I can't tell you that I have any great solutions that I'm seeing on the horizon, but there is an incredible disparity in care in this country related to geography. And part of it is related to the way we have the health insurance coverage, because there were a lot of states that refused to expand Medicaid, which was a part of the coverage provisions of the ACA. But there's also, if you look at certain chronic conditions like obesity and heart disease and diabetes, they're all linked medically. If you become obese and you have a certain genetic background, you're going to end up with type 2 diabetes. You get type 2 diabetes, you're going to end up with cardiovascular disease. And there are areas of this country where the rates of obesity and heart disease, and even though heart disease is declining, the heart disease rates are still high, and diabetes are just so much higher than anywhere else. And that really shouldn't be. And I really think that could be taken care of if we could agree to have a national approach to how we insure people. And everyone has to be covered. If you cover people piecemeal, it just doesn't make sense from an insurance point of view. You don't have an appropriate way of spreading the risk. That's my soapbox.
Does employer-based insurance cause those disparities? I mean, not the geography specific ones, but other inequalities.
No, you know what employer-based insurance did? And it started during the war, when it was another way of giving people benefits without giving them a salary. I think what happens is a lot of the employers think their risk is better than that company's risk, so they break up the insurance pool and they end up having their own little insurance pool. And then certain types of companies will end up having higher risk just by the nature of who they are and who goes to work in those industries and what kind of health risk there is related to the industry. So it's really fractured the pool. And then employers also like to muck around in care delivery. And that was actually my job when I was at GM, is we tried to get the health plans to do what we wanted them to do. And they really had to, because for most of the health plans, we had a huge population. So I think there's a lot of reasons why it doesn't make sense for it to be employer-based anymore.
Just to clarify, fracturing the pool means people are labeled underneath a group of people that we work with, or?
Well, if you have an insurance, the best thing you can have is everybody insured in the same pool, so that the sick people, with the high cost are balanced by the well people with the low cost, the young people balance the old people, and so forth. And when you start cutting up the pool, the smaller the pool gets, the harder it is to spread the risk. And that's one of the problems that some of the plans are seeing in the ACA is, and their big fear was that and it's actually turned out to be the case, that they were going to end up with people who were sicker than a population that's getting insured in a different way.
I got a question here.
I completely agree with you that, some kind of national health insurance is needed, but do you think it's actually feasible given that our country is so ideologically and politically divided? And
Well, I don't know if it's possible for us to do anything anymore to tell you the truth.
well, I guess
But-
then what do you think are like the next steps and how can we work within the system we have to at least move towards that?
To work within the system, we have to move towards some kind of single payer.
Yeah.
Well, the interesting thing, I think actually some people have suggested that the ACA might have been kind of a backdoor way of getting to single payer, because when it doesn't work, and there are a lot of insurance companies now that are pulling out of the ACA because they're losing money on it, and that this will be the last, kind of option standing. But I think it's become less unpalatable, at least on the Democratic side of the equation. But it used to be even unpalatable on the Democratic side of the equation, so that's a step forward. Of course, Bernie Sanders is playing a big role in putting forth the idea that we ought to have, some kind of single payer or national health insurance. And by the way, his health advisor is a woman named Steffi Woolhandler, who between her and her husband, they've probably been, and they're both at Harvard, the longest term physician advocates for single payer that I can remember. So that's kind of interesting. But it took how many years for us to get the ACA, just to get the the change in the ACA. So I don't know that I can tell you that it'll happen. It probably won't happen in my lifetime, but maybe it'll happen in your lifetime.
Bill Clinton's over here, actually you're here at Berkeley today, I think, giving a talk for Clinton Initiative, that when he was president, which was when I was out here, they were already trying to do healthcare plans, single payer system. That was back in the early 90s, right? And it's taken, so you can just do the math on how long it's taken even just for that change to happen. We're talking.
Right, to get reform. I mean, that's why, Obamacare was really, I know there are people that just viscerally hate the idea of Obamacare, but it was just a huge step to actually be able to get a significant healthcare reform
Any
passed.
change.
Medicare was one of the smaller outcomes for that.
Okay, so let me move on, because it seems like we're going to start losing people here.
Right.
Am I going the right way? Yeah. Okay. So I just want to say a few words about, these are buzzwords. Patient engagement right now is a huge buzzword, because the days when physicians could say, you need to do X, and patients went and did it or didn't do it, and that was okay, because they got paid anyway, those are really gone. What we now know is that physicians need to be engaged in their own care, particularly chronic illness care. So I trained in endocrinology and took care of a lot of diabetics when I was in training, and it just used to amaze me that I'd be telling them you should do this or this or this, and I'd see them once a month when they were living with this chronic illness 24/7, right, and really needed to have the ability to take care of themselves. So when you're thinking about solving problems, tools for people to self-manage is really huge. Tools to get people actually engaged in their care is really huge, although we don't fully understand what that means. And then the sister or the brother of patient engagement is physician communication. And we really have to do a lot of work on that, because it's not well taught or understood in a lot of medical schools. And then we really need to have an enhanced service orientation. I mean, what other industry would think it's okay to go and sit in an ER for 8 hours, or to wait for 2 hours in a waiting room to see a physician for 15 minutes. Really, all of that has to change as well. Okay. So demedicalizing. I've talked about this already. We've got to quit thinking that everybody has to get everything from a physician. We need to teach do-it-yourself care more. We ought to be teaching it in high school, and I think that the role of digital health and apps and platforms to help people do that is really huge. A lot of work taking place in that area. So disruptive healthcare technologies. I have 3 EDGE interns, or former EDGE interns, who work for me, and they did slides for me, and they insisted that everybody would know who that guy was, because I didn't.
Who knows what that guy is?
Yeah, okay. I did include a link to an article that I wrote about disruptive technologies in the next 10 to 15 years. And I think there's just so many areas for disruption, but I think bloodless technologies are one. If we could just figure out how to be able to measure things transdermally, which has been a challenge as opposed to via needles, that would really be a huge huge benefit. And people are starting to do that. There are now some blood glucose monitors that are starting to be able to do measurement transdermally, but what we'd like is to be able to do that in a lot more places. I'm going to skip the nanotechnology. I want to talk a little bit about AI for diagnosis based on pattern recognition. So when people learn dermatology, or when you read an electrocardiograph, or when you read an X-ray, you're looking for patterns. You're looking for something. You know what the normal pattern is, and you're looking for something that's out of the normal. Well, it turns out you can actually gather all the data about normals and abnormals and use algorithm with kind of AI in order to do that kind of pattern recognition. And some people are saying, boy, if we do that, then we won't need radiologists and dermatologists. My son is a radiologist, and I wrote an article about it. And it turns out what you would do is you would spare people from having to read a lot of normals, right? Because you could use the AI algorithms to say, well, all of these are normal. They don't need a human eye. I can just pass on it. And then you're able to use your workforce to just analyze and interpret the abnormals. And I think you're going to see that both in radiology and in dermatology. Genomics are going to be huge going forward and tie into this whole thing of personalized medicine and the president's initiative around personalized medicine. And then finally, the microbiome. Anybody in here know what the microbiome is? So this is a really cool area. So the microbiome are all those bacteria that live in us or on us, and the gut microbiome turns out to be it turns out actually to be an important part of us because it alters our metabolism of things that we eat. So it plays an important role in carbohydrate metabolism. And one of the things that we're finding out with the microbiome now is a good, healthy, diverse microbiome is good for you when it gets altered. And how do we alter our microbiome? We do it all the time. Physicians do it all the time.
Medicine.
Yeah, you take antibiotics and you kill off some of the bacteria that you need. So when the microbiome gets less healthy, it affects you in a lot of ways. And not just with weight loss. We do know that if you're a thin person, you have a healthy microbiome, and you get a fecal transplant, because we do stuff like that, from a fat person with an unhealthy microbiome, that you'll gain weight, right? So there's this interplay. There is a startup called Ubiome that's doing a lot. Have you heard about that one, Francis?
I haven't heard about it. I've
Yeah,
never seen it.
I think the people are out of UCSF, and they collected fecal samples from lots and lots of people and have developed tools for the microbiome. Any questions about that?
Is that like kind of along those same lines as some markets where they say, oh, eat this yogurt or drink this milk with the acidophilus bacteria?
Well, acidophilus,
yeah.
But it's interesting because that's only, in the yogurts you only have a few bacteria. The healthy microbiomes have millions has just a lot of variety of bacteria. And if you guys, if any of you have gone and looked at any of the TED Talks, because they're all available online, there is one that I saw, I think about 2 years ago on the microbiome that could actually show you patterns of your microbiome by the different kinds of colonies of bacteria that you have and how it correlated with different kinds of chronic illness. So really interesting. And I think you're going to see a lot more of that as we learn how to manipulate the microbiome. So for diagnosis, I didn't know I could do that slide. Yeah, okay. So a lot of things on the horizon for diagnosis. I talked about the blood technology, the AI, the genomics, big data. Are you guys familiar with this concept of big data? So now that we have the capabilities through our computers, people are not only collecting lots and lots of data on, let's say, an individual, everything out of your electronic health record, right? Or everything out of a population's electronic health record. So we have all these data points, but they're now taking those and bumping them up against other kinds of data points, like data on weather, data on wind, data on where toxin-producing factories are in relationship to where a population lives. So they're merging these. And what's really exciting about it to me is there are a lot of things in medicine that we get trained that we don't really know why people get it, sarcoid, different kinds of illnesses. I think this is going to give us new knowledge about human health and human disease. It's going to help us to think about what causes a problem in a different way. And targeted immune therapeutics. Have you guys heard about this? So this is really huge, particularly in cancer treatment now, because it turns out most people, I think, in oncology would now say cancer is actually, a disease of a mutated genome, and these cancers end up having molecules on them, biomarkers on them that are immunogenic. And companies like Genentech, just down in the peninsula, which actually started out of UCSF, scientists from UCSF, is a leader. They're not the only ones, but they're one of the leaders in the area of developing these very, very targeted immunotherapy. So antibodies that go in and target specific biomarkers on tumor cells. And there's one called Tarceva. I don't know if you've heard of Tarceva, but Tarceva is for lung cancer. Lung cancer used to be, chemotherapy just doesn't work that well for lung cancer. Tarceva, you could actually start to think about, if not cure, turning what was a deadly disease into a chronic illness. So it's very, very exciting work that's being done.
Is this the one where they basically attach a toxin to these?
They don't even have to attach a toxin. It can be the mechanism. They don't even have to, if you're thinking like they bring a, I don't know, like a chemotherapeutic agent right to it. They don't even have to do that. It can just amp up the immune system.
Wow.
And the reason why this is so exciting is if I give you chemotherapy and I kill 95% of your cancer cells, those 5% can come back and grow. And I don't know how many people read when breath becomes air. Anybody read this book? So you remember in this story, this is an amazing story. I encourage all of you to read it. This is a guy who is a chief resident in neurosurgery at Stanford, like minutes away from the golden ring, right, of graduating and being on faculty as a neurosurgeon, when he ends up with stage 4 lung cancer. And he tells his whole story. He's a wonderful writer, but he describes getting treated with Tarceva. And Tarceva, so he had cancer everywhere, and the Tarceva melted almost everything away except one spot up here in his lung, which was probably Tarceva resistant, and probably what grew back. You don't know for sure, but probably what grew back and ultimately killed him. So these are really, really powerful treatments. Psychiatric disease. For a long time, particularly those of you who are interested in digital health, I would say psychiatric disease was pretty much ignored. Wouldn't you say that, Francis, in the early days? You go to these meetings, you say, well, wow, they're talking about an app for everything, but they didn't have much in the way of digital health solutions for psychiatric disease. But we're now starting to see that. Both in terms of a company, Ginger.io, that can collect all sorts of data from your cell phone, that can be used to tell a story about where you are. Let's say you have a depression that waxes and wanes. That data can be useful to tell not just you, but if you give permission to your physician, to tell your physician, ooh, something's going wrong. Look at that, Francis hasn't gone out of the house in 10 days. He's not calling his usual friends. He isn't really moving around very much. You know, other hints as to what's going on with you. So that's exciting. There's also a lot of stuff going on at the molecular level in terms of better understanding Alzheimer's, autism, and schizophrenia. Okay, so the other big thing that's happening now is this whole area which we used to call complementary medicine, which includes meditation and other alternative approaches. Are you all familiar with that? When I was in training, we said, oh, come on, that's just, you know, I mean, we were kind of taught and we mouthed that was garbage, but we now know that these alternative approaches are hugely powerful, that meditation has lots of really good effects, both on the brain and in general physical health. And the other thing that we now know is how important sleep is. So there's probably a tie between how meditation works and how sleep works. And we know from some really interesting studies about sleep that when you sleep, the channels where the fluid, the central spinal fluid that is, they actually get bigger, and there's some thought that sleep actually is the time when you're washing the toxins out of your brain. So really, really interesting stuff. And the other big thing that we're going to see now is food as medicine. So as opposed to the solution always being you need to take a pill, I think you're going to see people turning a lot more. I mean, yogurt is an example, right? But I think you're going to see a lot more sophisticated approaches to understanding how food works in health and in disease.
Question. Well, what have you heard, and what are your opinions on homeopathy in the realm of alternative medicine, where it fits into play?
Well, you know, I got to tell you that I have not done any work in homeopathy. My understanding of homeopathy is that it doesn't have a good science base and doesn't have good studies, but you could challenge me on that and, you know, find that it does. Has anybody actually looked at the science behind homeopathy? Yeah, I'm sorry I can't give you a better answer. I think that there's more science around acupuncture, you know, a lot of the Asian kinds of traditional approaches than there is around homeopathy. But again, I don't know.
Good question. I've heard that there's talks now between marrying those two philosophies of medicine with allopathic and naturopathic medicine becoming more of a one school thought.
Well, sure, this is integrative medicine.
Wow.
And there's
cool.
actually a book by a woman who got her PhD here at Berkeley that she looked at, she somehow, I can't even remember why, she heard that there were people who had spontaneous remissions from advanced cancer. Right? I mean, but most of us never meet anybody who has that, but she decided to do work for her PhD here. Her name is Kelly Turner, looking at what kinds of things, she went around the world and identified people who had spontaneous remissions and interviewed them and looked at what kinds of things they said they did in order to take care of themselves and treat their own cancer. And she found that there were 8 common things. I'm not going to be able to remember them off the top of my head. One of them was taking charge of your care, the total opposite of what Francis and I were at training. We were told, I'm in charge of your care now, right? No, this turns out to have important correlations with people who have spontaneous remission. Food, these alternative therapies like Reiki and meditation and, you know, all of that all played a role in it. So if you Google Kelly Turner, she actually does a project here. You'll get the name of her book. Really good reading, really interesting, really something quite different from traditional medicine. Okay, I did that. Yeah, sorry. Oh, okay. So we actually did cover almost everything. So these are the resources that I gave to you. They're all from my blog, but they're not all written by myself. And I think that, as I mentioned before, project. Watch some of the videos of the entrepreneurs. They're all on our YouTube channel, which is thedoctorweightsin.com, or excuse me, it's YouTube and The Doctor Weighs In. And take a look at some of these articles, which I think will help to give you a flavor of how entrepreneurs are looking at solving these problems. So I'm happy to take questions. Anybody have any questions?
What do you think is the healthcare industry's greatest need in terms of like professionals? Like what type of people? Like more physicians or like people in the business side or the tech side? Or?
Well, it's interesting. I actually think they need people at all sides. I mean, we need physicians. I mean, there are people who have been predicting for years that we're going to have a primary care shortage. And part of that, as I mentioned, is fueled by the fact that medical school is such a long slog, and people come out of school in so much debt that they make decisions to go into non-primary care fields that are going to pay better, because primary care, pays less than anyone else. So we definitely need that, but we need, we need more nurses. We need, I think, a lot of the bioengineering fields where people are coming up with these, solving these solutions, problems of how can you get to a bloodless lab test, are all really important. But if I would go by what your natural inclination is. If you're a organizer, business kind of person, there's certainly room to have people who are sophisticated on the business side of healthcare as well. And nobody ever talks about health insurance as a career, but it is one of the more challenging fields in healthcare, is to understand how would you structure payment that allows people to get what they need without bankrupting whoever's paying for it. Sure. Anyone else? Okay.
By the way, those 6 points that she touched on, those are great ideas for your projects. Any one of those are pain points actually in healthcare, and actually very tactful.